Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Welcome back to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell, here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 51, What We Learnt in America. And I say we, but actually I was invited to America. This was just Simon who went out there to San Diego to give a talk at the Lead Generation World Conference. Simon, what's it like being back in the UK? How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. I've a bit of jet lag, mainly not me, more my kids, who are 1 and nearly 4. And yeah, I've had a distinct lack of sleep. I think I got 3 hours last night. So if I'm rambling, you know what to blame it on. And then a really weird thing today, I dropped my daughter off at nursery, walking down the road, and there was a guy dying next to the pavement. So I had to help him, give him CPR, call an ambulance. I thought he was dead. Really strange. I mean, I told you earlier, but it was a sort of thing that sticks with you and makes you realise what's important. But yeah, I thought he was dead, and I got the police came and ambulance and everything else, but he didn't breathe for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Apparently he's still alive and in hospital. Incredible.
Yeah, when you messaged me about it this morning, I was expecting you to come into the office. Yeah, at this point you didn't actually know. You thought he had died, right? And then
I was convinced. He was. I mean, as far as I know, like I got to him and he was still alive, but he effectively died while he stopped breathing, and so he's. I was on the phone to an ambulance because I was the first person there, and another guy appeared, and so me and him were taking it in turns to do CPR and try and figure out, what was wrong with him. And he didn't breathe until the ambulance turned up, when we stopped, which I reckon was 20, 30 minutes, something like that. It was a long time.
But then, to clarify, you got a text message from them, right?
Yeah, I got a text message from the policeman who was at the scene and took my details, and he said, I'll read it to you, that he's alive. It was the male who you called an ambulance for and administered CPR to is still with us. He's very poorly, but receiving the best care. Unbelievable.
Well, yeah, I mean, that sort of, like you say, makes everything pay into significance. But I guess that's a sort of relatively positive, possibly outcome as we can hope for, considering how you were this morning when I first spoke to you.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to hijack the podcast with the talk of death, but it's, you don't have these things happen every day. I'm just pleased that he's alive. I hope, the policeman who sent the text message talks about his family getting in contact with me and a couple of other people, or one other person that was appeared at the scene as well. So, just hope that he's going to be okay. That's it.
Well, yeah, let's crack on. No, good. It's we don't often segue into this personal stuff, but I think now and again, in exceptional circumstances, we certainly can. But yeah, nice one. I don't know the correct phrases to say to someone when they've administered CPR and saved someone's life, but nice one. I'll get you a beer or something. I think is anything I can think of. But yeah, hope all is good. And with that, I'll segue smoothly on to you being back. You were out at Lead Gen World in San Diego. Michael's conference, who we've had on the show before. What was that like? And how was the talk you gave?
Yeah, it was good going out there. I met up with a couple of people I know, one of which, or two of which I knew were going anyway, and then I bumped into a couple of people I didn't know that we've worked with and things in the past before. I think I had a couple of clients over there that are based in the US. But yeah, it was good. It was great going over sort of first party data and lead generation in a different country. And in terms of the talk, it was largely around US companies moving into the UK, and how they could do that and how the markets are different and things like that.
And I mean, I guess there are lots of different things you don't know what's over there, but what would you say are some of the key differences or the big differences you noticed within lead gen in America?
So the first thing is there's definitely sort of there's less of a mystique to lead gen in America. And by that I mean not like that there is in the UK, but there's a, I don't know if it's like more education in the US or like more acceptance of and knowledge about how lead generation is done, the different methods and routes available and things like that. But there's definitely, it holds less of a opaqueness than it seems to in the UK. And that, I'm not talking about like lack of fraud and stuff like that. I just mean the buyers and sellers seem to have much more of a sort of connection and understanding of what the other does. I would say the lead buyers in the US are much easier to identify. By that I mean, in the UK, if you want to work with like, I don't know, a big brand and they're buying leads, it can be incredibly difficult to find out who that person is that could be the lead buyer. And they typically don't have job titles that associate themselves with doing that role. Whereas in the US, it's like, that is their job. That is their job role. So I suppose that's good in one way because it means that it opens them up to a lot more opportunities that they lead buyers at brands or agencies, whatever, might be lacking because no one knows who they are without strong investigation. I think it's relatively easier at smaller companies because it's usually the owner or someone, there's only a finite amount of people it could be, but at larger brands it's definitely harder.
Does that kind of imply that the fact, like you say, that they have these designated people in companies that is like brands and stuff like that, they'll have like a lead buyer who works there? Does that imply that lead buying is bigger over there? It's more kind of thought of within these companies, or does it just, in like here, it's more just a part of marketing in general or something?
Well, I think the difference is that here it actually gets tied up with sales rather than marketing. So it tends to, I mean, it depends. In the UK, it tends to be driven by the contact details you're collecting. So if it's like lead gen for email only, it'll go into a marketing team. If it's lead gen with a telephone number, it goes into a sales team. Whereas in the US, it's probably similar, actually. I don't know if the differences are strong like that. But the roles are probably the same between the US and the UK. It's just that, they don't call themselves something else like, I don't know, dialer manager, performance person. They'd just be like lead buyer for, they're just really easy to identify. And does that mean that they take it more seriously? Maybe, yeah. That could be why there's a sort of stronger alliance or less mystique behind it, because the lead buyers tend to be, or seem to be, I don't know if this is definitely the case, potentially more educated about, the lead generation market and the type of leads that they're going to buy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder why. I mean, you say there's mystique over here, but I mean, I think you mentioned opacity and inherently there's a lack of transparency there. Like, does that filter across everything? Would you think in comparison to America? Are they just, we talk about transparency all the time, how things should be. So is America more like how we believe things should be? Things will end up here eventually. We're playing catch up.
No, I don't think there's any. But strangely saying that, I don't necessarily think there's more transparency. In some respects, I suspect it's still a problem over there where people are overselling products or saying stuff is collected in some ways that it isn't. But what you've got to imagine, if you're a sort of more mature lead buyer who understands the market and identifies solely with that role, you've almost made it your job to have knowledge about it. And it's really funny, really, because I've been a huge lead buyer in the past, right? So before we did software, as you know, I would say I was probably one of the biggest lead buyers in the UK. I mean, buying tens of thousands of leads a day. Not just me, I mean, as a team. I'm just doing it in first person. And that is only really possible if you're like heavily educated and understand the market entirely and understand like all the sources and can track and analyze and do absolutely everything and use the software. And that it's probably done a bit more in the US than it is the UK, because there's, why wouldn't you if that is your role? But if your role is like tied in with something else, as you suggested, like some other sales role or some other marketing role, it's like, what do you give more precedence to, I guess? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I was just interested, I guess, in thinking about it from the UK perspective. If I don't know, is it almost like still a little bit of a negative perception of lead generation or something here? I'm just trying to work out why there is this mystique. Like, why aren't we? Why are things more clear? I guess.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? I think it's I think it's this thing of like just data. People don't necessarily understand the difference that all data that they use and comes into the company via third parties, however it comes, is usually some element of lead generation that happens behind it. So maybe that's what it is. It's just like this understanding of it's a slightly more mature market for the lead buyers.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's that's the idea, isn't it? That generally we think of things in America as being slightly ahead of the rest of the world. I mean, not much more of the UK, but other countries. But it'll be interesting to see.
Another example is, I'd say software is another example as well. So like obviously in the UK, and we know this, you'll have like a load of lead buyers that don't either think they need like dedicated software or need software to buy leads. And they'll, I don't know, use strange things, or they're sending leads in different ways. In the US, it's much more a given that you need software to be able to do this stuff.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, we try and keep this objective, but obviously you go over there as part of Data Bowl. So from a software perspective, like, is there new stuff over there? Is there anything different that you thought, okay, I've not heard of this before? Or, we find sort of software stuff out that was interesting?
No, I wouldn't say there's. They have a few more like dedicated solutions. So this is if you are buying leads, and connecting them, like, I don't know, an all-in-one dialer solution that is optimized like specifically for lead generation, and potentially stuff around stuff like texting leads rather than having this sort of operation that will text leads if you can't dial them immediately. So there's a few dedicated solutions, but no, in terms of other software like CRMs, we use all the ones that in the UK anyway. Lead distribution systems are sort of quite similar in a lot of respects. So in a lot of ways it isn't. There's just a few more dedicated things, and it's because the lead buying industry is a lot bigger, because obviously the size of the market as well.
Yeah, and just to flip things around, what was some of, to look at it from their perspective, what were some of the questions that you had the American audience, I assume, asking you about how things were here, like, in reverse?
Well, asking me about Medicare leads over here was quite interesting. So I was like,
it don't exist as an industry.
Yeah, I was like, we just have the NHS.
I saw that once for someone describing Breaking Bad, the TV show. It was just like, it was set in England. Oh, yeah. he needs some money. Need any money? That's it. It's the whole show's done. But I guess this is another thing.
Yeah. Some of the questions were, I mean, a lot were around compliance and GDPR and how it's different in the US and stuff like that. So what's strange in the US is, in terms of data laws, and this is like the collecting or buying of data, the laws are really archaic. It's like each state has their own individual laws, and there's no like overarching federal law that has like any deep impact. I think California has some of the most stringent, which is like the CCPA or something, which is kind of similar to GDPR. But then they have this thing called TCPA, which is to do with like getting unsolicited calls and being dialed too many times and having automated dialers and whatever else. And individuals will sue companies like as an individual for a lot of money, and they'll gather together. So it's like a big way of earning money. So it's a strange thing, because obviously the data laws are less stringent, but the laws around then contacting that data are much more stringent, and they have like massive fines. I mean, that makes the ICO look like they're not sort of fining anyone particularly at all, because go after companies in a big way over there. They'll make them go bust and all types of things. So it's there were a lot of questions around, or when I say there weren't actually that many questions, we just talked about it a fair bit. Some of the other questions were around how do you enter the market and things, and we talked about buying companies in the UK and how it's difficult to like penetrate markets without boots in the ground and sort of understanding local buyers and things like that. But yeah, it was a lot of it was around the regulations.
Do you think, just to go back, do you think people like in the UK or like the ICO and stuff will learn from America and what they're doing? Do you think they'll crank up the kind of fining and that kind of thing here?
Well, the difference is because no one's it's like the government is fining companies, aren't they? Whereas in the US, under this TCPA thing, it's individuals going after companies. So whether something like that change in the UK, I mean, the ICO must look at it and think, can we, or it almost fall into another department actually around the calling stuff. But it's, yeah, I think they must look at it in some respects and think, could we be doing more? Could we be issuing more fines? Because some of the stuff with like the ICO, they'll have like 2 billion instances of a misdemeanor before they'll issue a 20 grand fine. Whereas in the US, there might be like 10 and they'll issue a fine, a huge fine. Yeah. So the stringency behind it is completely and utterly different. I think that, you have a huge opportunity to be doing wrong under GDPR in the UK under the ICO and not necessarily even end up with a fine, more get told you are doing something wrong, stop it, or we'll fine you.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't want it to seem. I'm trying to think of prospective buyers listening. I don't feel like the UK is just really lax with this stuff. We need to encourage the right mindset.
Yeah, I don't think it's lax. It's more to do with that in the UK it's like a law, right? It's a law and it's the government that is administering the law. Whereas in the US it's like the Wild West. But imagine it's like the people are then just suing companies.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's just it's interesting as well the state stuff you said. Like, do companies tend to? I mean, I guess it's different if it's a big brand, but like with the sort of lead generators themselves, and do they tend to operate within states individually rather than like having to work out what the difference is between them?
No, I think they'll do it nationwide, but I mean the data laws are really lax, right? Like you literally can just like buy and sell data. There's no in a lot of states you can't do it in California, but they're really lax, like the data laws in terms of like the ownership of data and stuff. It's just it is like the Wild West. But what I think they rely on is these like secondary components of then contacting people, which is where the fines and stuff come in. But the thing with like just being able to like gather data willy-nilly is that you'd obviously use that for marketing purposes if you could then attract that person or to attract that person. So you can use it as almost like a metadata level stuff to run ads and things like that on. But it's a completely different like route they've gone down to GDPR, and whether I'm sure they look at GDPR and think we could do some sort of nationwide law like this, and I'm sure stuff like the TCPA and the different fines that come out of individuals and things could be better in the UK or in Europe.
Interesting. I mean, we've had I'd say quite a few American guests on the show. I don't remember exactly how many, and we tend to, I guess, find the similarities when we talk about stuff maybe. But it's interesting the differences too. Like, it's difficult almost for me to imagine some of this stuff because I didn't go. But yeah, it does sound like a bit bizarre for the way you're sort of describing it.
I think it's just for me, it's slightly bemusing with all this like state laws around data and stuff. It's just, it's a strange thing. But one of the guys who I was speaking to over there, who's from the UK and he's lived in California for 8 years, he said the strange thing about America is because the UK and the US speak the same language, we think that there's like common grounds. But he said, but the UK has far more in common with the rest of Europe that it thinks is more different than it does with the US. It's just that there's a language barrier that means we don't necessarily realize it.
Very interesting. I bet you could apply that to stuff way outside of just lead generation. Like I guess in all aspects, maybe there's that trick sometimes.
But the UK is different to a lot of lead gen as well. In the rest of Europe, I think it's definitely different in like Spain, Italy, and France and stuff like that. It's behind the UK definitely.
Well, I mean, we've talked about what we learned in America. I think there's covered a few things there. I feel like there's some more questions I probably we'll raise and maybe we'll revisit in a future podcast. But interesting stuff. And anyone else who's listening is from America and wants to get back on the show, by all means, reach out to us and we'll discuss it. And Michael, if you're listening to this next time, I want an invite when you're putting one on over in San Diego, please, because I was miserable sat here having to deal with January English weather when you were out in on beaches places. That was episode 51, what we learned in America. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.